We're going to go, excuse me, we're going to go ahead and call the Interim Joint Committee on Local Government for September the 26th to order. And before we get started, does anyone have any guests they'd like to introduce? Representative Meredith.
Looking out there, I see our first-term Warren County Sheriff, Mr. Brett Hightower, out there. Good to have you here today.
Well, we're glad to have you here. I know Representative Imes won't do it, but I see we have Judge Executive Kenny Imes, from former member of the House here, and we're glad to have you here today. We'll move on. We need approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion? Oh, I'm sorry. We got to do a roll call first. So, Madam Secretary, will you call the roll?
Senator Armstrong, Senator Elkins,
Present.
Senator Harper Angel, Senator Bledsoe, present. Senator McDaniel, here. Senator Nemus,
Present.
Senator Storm, Senator Thayer,
Here.
Senator Wheeler, here. Senator Williams, here. Representative Bentley, Representative Bowling, here. Representative Bray,
Present.
Representative Brown, Representative Chester Burton, Representative Dixon, Representative Doan,
Present.
Representative Frazier Gordon,
Yes, ma'am.
Representative Freeland,
Present.
Representative Imes,
Here.
Representative Justice, here. Representative Lockett,
Here.
Representative Meredith, Representative Proctor, present. Representative Raymer, Representative Reed,
Here.
Representative Stalker,
Present.
Representative Stevenson, Representative Thomas,
Present.
Senator Mills, Representative Bridges.
Here. And I do want to send the regrets of Senator Mills for not being able to be here today. He had something come up and called late yesterday. But with that, we have the approval of the minutes. Now do we have a motion?
Second.
So moved. We've got a quorum, so we're constitutionally able to do business. So let's move forward with our first discussion of local electronic records and portals. And we have the Clerks Association coming forward. And if you'll come forward, introduce yourself and for the record. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Stephanie Schumacher. I'm the Mason County Clerk and also president of the Kentucky County Clerks Association.
Good morning. I'm Tabitha Clemens. I'm the Grant County Clerk and incoming president of the County Clerks Association. So we're here to talk to you this morning a little bit about our land records and the modernization that's taken place in the county clerk's offices. So we will jump right in. We've recently conducted a survey of all of our members, the 120 county clerks. 101 of them participated. It was a pretty quick turnaround for the survey. We only had a few days in between finding out that we were coming before you today and getting their responses in. So we felt like that was a good response. Almost 85% of the clerks responded. 68% of the county clerks have 1 to 2 full-time recording deputies. And why that is important is because when we're talking about the modernization of the county clerk's offices, it's not like there's this huge team of people taking up, half of a floor of an office building. It's really just the people that you come into interaction with when you come into your own county clerk's offices that's doing the majority of this modernization work. And then out of the 94 county clerks who responded to the survey, 94 of them have less than 5 full-time deputies who are currently working in just recordings. So of all the things that we do, we have the fewest amount of deputies working in this department. So the counties that are currently offering a search portal and are compliant with the January deadline in 2024, 98 counties, we were able to also talk to some of our vendors to back up this data to make sure that we are accurate in this. 98 of the counties have already met that deadline. 3 counties at this point have not, and then we have the ones who did not respond. All right, so we want to give you a little bit of a background. Some of you may not have been around back in 2021 when Representative Meredith and Senator Howe co-chaired the Modernization Task Force. So we want to give you some of the things that were adopted out of that task force when it comes to land records. January 1st of 2024, all county clerks in the state shall and maintain the portal that allows a person to electronically file a recorded instrument. So what does that mean? That means that all of our attorneys, people in the business world working in mortgages, can electronically file their documents with the county clerk's offices. I know for the vast majority of us who have taken on that responsibility already, we love that capability. That feature is a huge improvement in our offices because we're receiving information quicker. We're also able, if there's an issue with a document, we're able to send that back to the submitter instantaneously. And in a lot of cases, within a day or 24 hours of us rejecting a document, they're sending it back to us corrected or with questions. If they have questions, they're calling, but it's so much faster. And the funding to our offices is guaranteed at that point. When we're receiving money through the electronic portal, that is guaranteed money to our office. It's not a check that might bounce. It's not a credit card that could be charged back. It's something that is secured and electronically deposited into an account. On June 30th of 2024, each county clerk shall provide and maintain a portal that contains the recorded instruments filed on or after June 30th of 1994. So the first phase of the modernization of making sure that we have preserved the documents in our office was to go back 30 years. That would be for a residential title search. The goal of the task force was to get us back to where we could do 60-year searches, which are commercial searches for land records. So the things that need to be recorded, all of the required documents that we are required for both the 2024 deadline and then the upcoming 2026 deadline when we'll meet that 60 years of records, are deeds, mortgages, fixture filings under the Uniform Commercial Code, plats of subdivided property, all covenants, conditions, restrictions that relate to real property, easements, leases, memorandum of leases, power of attorneys, land contracts, wills, and affidavits that affect or clarify the title of a property. There's also a few outliers like child support, judgment liens, federal and state tax liens, homeowners association, condos, those sorts of things that have different deadlines in place. So the deadline is still 2024. The project that would be a little different is that we don't have to go as far back on some of those documents as we do the deeds, mortgages. So that's kind of where we ended up in the task force. If you were around for that time, you know that was a very successful task force. I know that Representative Meredith had said in one of our committee meetings during that time that a lot of times they send things to a task force so that it fizzles out or dies. That's not the case in this. We really, all the partners who were at the table really took some responsibility into making sure that we were able to have legislation that served all the parties, and it was very successful. So we want to show you where we're meeting the deadlines. Where are we as a state? Where do we fall on having these deadlines met so that we can ensure that we are going to meet that 2024 deadline? So the first graph is for the documents from June 30th, 1994. So 65 counties have already met that deadline. We're already there. We have all of the documents to meet the first deadline. Then there's 6 counties who are currently not there, 16 counties that are currently working on that. They're currently backscanning, indexing, working to make sure that they're obtaining this goal. I think that the 6, after talking to some of those who are in that 6 number, they're waiting for funding, and we'll talk about funding in a little bit. There are counties that can't quite afford to just do some of the project on their own, so they're waiting on some funding. The next deadline is the 1966 documents going all the way back to 1966. 37 counties have already are currently working on that. 6 counties have met that deadline. 27 counties have not. They're still working, which would be about in line with what we have with the 16 who are working and the 6 who have not met the deadline yet. And again, I think this is based off of funding. Some of us need funding in order to secure the types of scanners that we need. A lot of the older documents are not loose leaf where we can just pull them out and use the scanners that we currently have in our offices. They're bound big books. If you've ever been in our office and done a title search or looked for your own deed to your property and went back a few decades, you're going to know that those books are bound and they're harder to scan. And we want to make sure that the quality of the documents that we're scanning are as high as possible. So that's why we need to work with our vendors to do that. Stephanie's going to talk to you a little bit about funding sources, how we can fund our offices.
So just to kind of tag back to the previous slide that Tabitha had just shown you, I think it's important to note that those counties that have already met a deadline or are working on that are with the fees that they currently have, whether through storage fees or grants. So they have been proactive as far as meeting these deadlines prior to any money being dispersed. So I think that's worthy to note. So the $10 storage fee, as you know, is collected when documents are recorded. Those are turned over to fiscal court and they're allowed to accumulate year to year. So there are stipulations in the statute as to how that's to be spent. And it's for projects in our deed room, whether it be scanning, equipment, storage. So that $10 storage fee was designated for that. The $25 million allocated from the last biennium, which is noted here, is going to be the RFP process led by Finance Department, and clerks have been involved. The funds are expected to be released this fall. Correct, yeah. And then we have fees from our office. So this a lot of times is excess fees. Clerks, we've back scanning, upgrading equipment, purchasing storage. There's lots of options with that. And then, of course, the last is the KDL Records Grant. And we are the only entity that funds this grant pool of money. So in 2022, the legislation adopted that 90% of the funds were to be awarded to county clerks. And this can be project grants, equipment grants, and salary grants. So each clerk would assess what he or she needs in his office and then apply for the grant at that time.
So I want to touch on briefly the $25 million that was allocated from the state budget. We appreciate the work that took place in order to get us to that point of being able to have those funds allocated. We have been very involved in the process with the finance cabinet, and that's been a great partnership. We've been really pleased with how well they've responded to us and listened to our concerns and what our offices need in order to get the RFP to where it is. It's currently out, it's closing soon, and we do expect to start seeing vendors to be approved and very soon on the RFP. So we hope that we'll see that $25 million start coming into our offices so that we can start meeting the deadlines. So we want to give you a rundown. The KDLA grant that Stephanie mentioned has been around for a good while. This isn't something new. The part that is new is that the task force added the stipulation that 90% of the funding would go back into the county clerk's offices to help us be sure that we're meeting those deadlines that was set forth in legislation. So I'm not going to read all of this to you, but I can you can definitely see that there was a downturn of the funding coming into the county clerk's office in 2021, and then it took a little uptick in 2022 and back down in 2023. There's various reasons for this. County clerks historically have applied for this funding because it's been able to help us in our offices, whether it's bought storage for us to be able to house more books as we have land transferring. The more land that transfers, the more mortgages that are taken out. It just means it's more paper in our offices because they're permanent records that we must keep in paper form. So we saw that the downturn. A lot of clerks in 2021, their grants were not approved. And we have worked to try to, as an association, try to provide some feedback on how to make sure that our grants are approved. But we're going to talk to you a little more about the history of the KDLA grant, and then the process from our standpoint on KDLA.
So, as far as the history of applying for KDLA grants, when I came into office as clerk in 2011, I had a great relationship with KDLA, as I think many clerks at that time would say. Your regional administrator would visit your office often and do a walkthrough of your records, go through, your storage, what you needed. Their expertise would help you to prioritize projects in the office. So sometimes maybe I want to do one thing, but my regional administrator would say, that's a great idea, but you have these books here, and I think this is what we really need to do. And at one point, my regional administrator actually found a gap in my microfilming that I did not know existed. So he came to me and helped me, with the grant. And I think what's missing now is that the clerks aren't having that relationship with the regional administrators, and I think they would like to see them more in their offices and offer the assistance they used to, as far as, the prioritizing of the projects, and also just to help with the writing of the grant. So I think that could be part of the reason maybe less clerks are applying, just for that reason. And then it's a I'm trying to think of the right word. It's a lot of work to go through this. And so it's hard when you get to the end of it and you've been dinged for something that maybe you had the wrong version of the form. So that's where the RAs would come in and be very helpful. I also think that I serve actually on the committee, the local records grant review committee, along with Campbell County Clerk Jim Larson. So what happens is clerks will submit grant applications. They'll do an administrative review in-house at KDLA, and then this local committee will meet. And what happens at that point is we are given the applications, and we review them and score them with a sheet provided by KDLA. But at the same time, the administrative review has already gone through and determined what was appropriate to be awarded and what didn't meet the standard. So by the time the clerks and the others come to this point, it's been somewhat decided. So that's, even though the clerks are serving on this, maybe that's not the best route to go as far as our input. And then, of course, the way the schedule with the grants falls often conflicts with our election schedule. So I know Campbell County Clerk and myself were not able to attend the meeting in May. He was doing voting machine inspections that day, and I was preparing for early voting. And there was another one where we had, it was the first day of filing. So I was busy taking filing papers from my local candidates. So I think maybe that calendar could be addressed as well, just for clerks to, be more involved. I know we want to be, but sometimes that is a conflict. And then thirdly, any clerk serving on that committee is not eligible to apply for grants. So the past couple years that Jim and I have served, we have not been allowed to apply for any of this money in our counties, when actually maybe a better option would be that we just abstain from the scoring and discussion of our personal grants during that review committee time.
So I'll speak to a couple things on this slide. There were several clerks in the last couple cycles that were turned down because they were not meeting preservation requirements. It was more of modernization, is what we were told from KDLA, which is just a play on words, is what we kind of feel like. We're all in this to ensure that our records are available to our business community who needs these records to be able to conduct business. And when we're trying to apply for grants to ensure that these records have a digital format, it shouldn't matter if it's modernization or preservation. It's just that we want to get the job done. Then several grants have received only partial funding. My county happens to be one of those. We have been proactive in Grant County during downtime of our land records department. My deputies have been going back and back indexing, which is the most costly part of any back scanning project, is ensuring that you have the index to be able to find the record. If you don't have the index, then you can't locate that record. It's just a matter of a bunch of documents being scanned in. So we've been very proactive in that. Because the dates didn't align perfectly, even though we gave an explanation in the grant, they struck the indexing and only allowed for partial funding for the back scanning, which now means my county's going to have to pay for the indexing of the documents in order to be able to find the documents. For our constituents to be able to find them, they have to have an index to find them. And that also happened to another county, similar size to mine, a small county, that the indexing was struck from the grant process. We also have, some concerns about the bidding process. It's always the lowest bid that's selected. And as we know in projects, whether you're, just looking to replace something at your home or something on a larger scale in our offices, sometimes the lowest bid isn't always the best. Sometimes the lowest bid isn't even compatible with the system that the county clerk currently has in place. So if the system's not compatible, then the county is having to figure out how to format or convert those existing record or the new records into their existing system, which is costly for the county at that point. So we just, we've been really successful with some other funding, whether we're using the $10 storage fee or using funding out of our own offices, or historically with KDLA. When I first came into office in 2015, the first state office that reached out to me was the Kentucky Department of Library and Archives. And at that time, my representative met me even before I was sworn into office, offered to come and meet me and to get me up to speed as to what we needed to do to ensure that our records were preserved in Grant County. At that time, there were 0 documents in my county scanned in. I'm fortunate we were able to secure grant funding for several years through the KDLA grants. But that has changed. We're not seeing the funding come through like what it was when Stephanie first took office or when I first took office. And we really have concerns for our new clerks who are coming in who don't know their representatives from KDLA. We were fortunate that they were some of the first people that we met when we came into office. Our new clerks who are coming in, they're not getting that same service.
If I can, Tabitha, on the bidding process, I just wanted to add that KDLA requires that you have 3 bids for each section of your grant application. So you have to provide those 3 bids in your packet, but then the lowest bidder, which Tabitha mentioned, is the one that's actually filled in on that section. So that's how that comes about, that you may have your vendor, but then 2 other vendors as well. So just as a further explanation as to how that requirement works.
We're happy to take any questions if anybody has any.
I think we're going to hold off and let KDLA come up. They may be able to explain some of this, and then we'll have questions at the end. So if that concludes your presentation, we'll have KDLA come up, introduce themselves, and we'll hear from them. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear? No? Yes. Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. Next slide. My name is Denise Lyons, and I am the Commissioner for the Kentucky Department for Libraries and Archives. The topic that I'll be addressing is the Local Records Grant Program. The Local Records Grant Program is administered by KDLA and is for any local government office interested in improving the management and preservation of its public records. New legislation specifies that 90% of the $1 fee will go towards projects of the county clerks. Any local government agency can apply as long as all previous grants have been closed. The Local Records Grant focuses on preservation, which may include projects such as microfilming vital records, re-recording damaged records, or purchasing document conservation supplies or equipment. The full list is available on our website and in the grant guidance, which we'll talk about on the next slide. This QR code is a direct link to all of this information. You can scan the code to review all the documents and guidance, but I'll also go through the process. First, the applicant, which is the local government agency, will choose a project and then write out details of that proposed project. The project goes out to bid, and all the information is provided in an application to KDLA, noting who was the lowest bid. Anyone who needs assistance during this process can contact our local records branch staff. They are there to answer any questions and to advise. Before I speak about application reviews, I want to note that we are committed to providing funding for these projects. As long as funds are available and up to the allotment that we receive each year, we will fund every application that meets all the grant requirements. To share the review process with you, the first step in the process is that the local records branch manager will review each for completeness and compliance. Step 2 is that the local records grant review committee reviews and scores them. Those recommendations are presented to the State Libraries, Archives, and Records Commission. They review those recommendations when they meet, which is on a quarterly basis. The commissioner will then notify the applicants. There are 2 funding cycles each fiscal year. Cycle 1 runs January through June, and Cycle 2 runs July through December. The total funding from 2021 to 2023 has equaled $2.67 million. To give you an idea about the amount of applications and what was funded, in fiscal 2022, 92% of the projects were funded in Cycle 1 and 90% in Cycle 2. In fiscal 2023, 100% were funded in both cycles. In the first cycle of fiscal year 2024, we received 22 applications, and 15 of those were awarded. For those not awarded, I will talk about common errors on the next slide. To provide you with an idea about why an application may not have been approved comes down to some common errors. The most common is that 3 bids were not submitted, or that the project requests something that the criteria does not allow, such as uploading scanned records. Another commonality is that the current forms were not used or the application was incomplete. A successful application will demonstrate how these funds preserve or provide greater access to records. We can highlight that there are some elements that make for a successful project. First, the urgency of the problem. This may be due to some kind of disaster, such as what happened in Graves County. Because they applied for a previous local records grant, KDLA was able to pull 218 rolls of microfilm of their records to replace those that were lost due to the tornado. In addition, we were able to extend an emergency local records grant to provide equipment and supplies that were also lost in the disaster. Other applications that were successful include the ability of the applicant to provide access to the public of the records under the proper security. And as always, the local records branch team, of which there are 4 employees, are available to answer any of the clerk's questions or provide guidance. Thank you.
Does that conclude your presentation?
That does conclude my presentation.
Oh, okay.
Yes, thank you.
Would you introduce the two ladies with you, please? Or let them introduce themselves.
Yes, I will let you introduce yourselves.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Jessica Williamson, and I'm the General Counsel for the Education and Labor Cabinet.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jordan Jones, and I'm the Executive Director of the Office of Legislative Services for the Education and Labor Cabinet.
Okay, now we'll open it
Thank
up
you.
for questions. Senator Thayer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm over here behind the
I'm sorry.
load-bearing post there. Was the 90% funding met in 2023?
I'm sorry. Let me look back.
I guess the question is related to the fiscal year.
Yes, of the applications we received, we funded 90% of them.
A follow-up, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
How often are your regional representatives visiting county clerk's office since the pandemic was officially declared over?
They will go upon request, so as much as they are asked to go. And remembering that there are only 4 of them and we have a current vacancy, and so the branch manager and the others are covering that region. So upon request at any time.
Representative Meredith.
Mr. Chairman, if I could have a few questions.
Sure.
I want to be a little more specific on the question that Senator Thayer asked about the 90% approval. Of those grants that were approved, it's not 90% approval, but did 90% of the funding go to clerks?
Yes. Since the legislation had been passed, they have followed that piece of it. So 90% of all the funding will go to county clerks.
Okay.
Other projects are secondary.
Can you provide us with documentation of such?
Sure.
Okay, thank
We
you.
can pull that and submit it to you.
With regard to the issue with help with the application process that you mentioned in the presentation, I know when I have talked to the clerks, one of the big concerns that they have is they work with their regional reps and they're told one thing and they submit per that. And then they may have an application that is denied by the actual administrative staff in the office here in Frankfort because they followed the guidance that they were given by the regional reps, but there's evidently some kind of a disconnect between what they're being told by those regional reps and what's actually happening once the grant is being administratively reviewed. And so I would really ask that you all try to bridge that communications gap in the future, because I think that's a significant problem in some of this, in the discussions that the clerks are having. And then I had a couple or 3 different presentations in my booklet here, and so I was looking over, and I know one of the things is there was a discussion of modernization versus preservation in there, and I also know that there was something stated in the other presentation about uploading of scanned and digitized records being prohibited as a part of that grant process. So one, my understanding in looking at this is that everything about preservation versus modernization, the modernization stuff is Senate Bill 135, which I helped author. The preservation piece that is restrictive to preservation is in an administrative regulation, is my understanding, that was probably pre-Senate Bill 135. Am I correct about that?
I actually don't have that information. I've been in my office only a few months, and so I can certainly confirm and get back to you. I don't want to misspeak.
And so what my inclination here is, and what I think is really, really important in this discussion, is that the statute should take preservation or take precedent over the administrative regulation. The administrative regulation may need to be updated to come in line with the statute. And so I would ask you to look into that. And I don't understand why the uploading of scanned digitized images is prohibited in the grant process either, because I know one of the other things that it says specifically on the other is to improve the management and preservation of local preservation I understand, but if you're talking about management, the indexing, the uploading, the ability for somebody to search and scan those, it certainly falls under management. So I don't know why that would be a prohibited thing based on the updated modernization language in Senate Bill 135. And so I would really ask that you all look into that administrative regulation and see, based upon Senate Bill 135's passage, that some of that needs to be updated.
Okay. Thank you.
I appreciate that. I'm just sitting here listening to some of this, and my concern may be the committee that oversees these grant approval. And it seems like the clerks, while being included, are being excluded in the deeper discussions of this. And in the discussions I've had with some that's called and everything, it's like they're just expected to rubber stamp whatever is done behind the scenes. And I just wonder if you could explain how we could better include them. And I mean, they're the scheduling with elections and their responsibilities. Maybe we could just wondering if there's a reason we can't work around those schedules, because they are demanding and constitutionally required. So just can you speak to that?
Sure. Since I'm new, my goal is to improve communication across the board. And I have been in discussions with my staff about how we may be able to do that. And part of that questions that I had did involve the review committee. My understanding is that the initial review from the KDLA branch staff is to assure that each of the pieces is in compliance and that the application is not incomplete. So every grant that meets those requirements is passed on, and from there the grant committee discusses. The grant committee does have the ability to rotate members so that every clerk could have an opportunity to serve or to roll off. And we have also been in discussion about how to make the process more inclusive and just improve the process and their ability to serve and have input in general.
Okay, and I know you're new to the position.
Yes.
But I know in the past there's been some problems with payments of these grants, follow through. There have been actually some legal suits to settle that, and I believe in a couple of them KDLA was found to be deficient on their side. And I'm just wondering if I know we've had a decent turnover of clerks also, and as they get new, as a new person coming in, it's difficult to get adjusted. And you've got certain requirements, no matter who's in the role, they've got to be met, and there's expectations, and getting caught up is crucial. So the field work, the area agents, I'm just hearing that it was a lot better, and now it's not. So, it could be that we need more than 4, and we can look at that. But I've got several questions here, and I'll probably take them up privately.
That would be great. Yes, we can discuss that.
But the conflict of schedules, the conditions being on the committee, and my main concern is who actually oversees the grant process. I mean, the buck stops somewhere, and I'm getting conflicting stories. I would like to know who actually has the final say in this grant process and what the conditions are. The other thing, and this would be for the KDLA, and you don't have to come back up, not KDLA, but the clerks, but I would like to know, have a list sent out to the committees of the counties that did not respond to your request. That, because a lot of times that's a problem in and of itself. They may be caught up, they may not, but no response is unacceptable. Even a phone call saying, here's what's going on. And I think that could go for both KDLA and, when you send these requests out, they don't get back to you. They're elected, they got a duty, they need to fulfill it. And if you get a no response, I think this committee would like to know about that, so that we can do that. Any other questions? I'm sorry. Representative Frazier Gordon.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks for being here today, and thanks for the other group as well. And I just have a comment or a question in regards to the vendor piece of it. Is the solicitation of those bids, is that at the discretion of the county clerks, or is that under your guidance, or?
That is part of the process the county clerks perform.
Okay, and who is responsible for giving the vendors guidance as far as what's needed to be included in the bid? Because I'm just thinking an ounce of prevention might be very helpful here to prevent additional expense and gaps down the line that were noted. If perhaps the vendors could be given, a checklist of your bid must include X, Y, and Z.
It is my understanding that it does provide all the details, but I can certainly review all the pieces and get back to you to confirm the answer.
Senator Harper Angel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you explain how the RA members are chosen? You said you have 4 and 1 vacancy. What's the process of finding the folks to serve as an RA?
It's a staff position, so we follow all the personnel, cabinet, and employment pieces of that.
Okay, I also believe that you have a discussion on the district board selection.
Yes, that
so
is
if we
next.
can move into that.
Thank you. This presentation is on the topic of selecting library board members. While it depends on how the library was established, most public library district boards will have 5 members. They can serve 2 consecutive 4-year terms. Then they must wait 12 months before serving again. Next slide. The new legislation enacted impacts 97 library systems, which means 97 counties, and it provided the fiscal courts the ability to adopt an alternative process. This has allowed the fiscal courts to be more participatory in the process of selecting library trustees. 13 have adopted that alternative process. KDLA has been updating forms and guidance to assist with this process, and I will mention that on the next slide. The process that KDLA undertook when learning about the new legislation was to work with the boards and adopt an application process, which is common practice for those who wish to serve on a board. The agency also created a dedicated email address so all correspondence from the county judge executive could be in the same place. We have revised all the documentation for this process, and all documents will be available on our website very soon. We have scheduled training for directors and trustees in the 2nd week of October. To review the process as it was, the library board would vote on 2 names for each vacancy. The library director would send them to KDLA for approval. KDLA confirms they are eligible, which simply means that we verify that they're following term limits. We then send the names to the county judge executive, who in turn selects 1 name. That name is sent to the fiscal court for approval, and the appointee is sworn into office. The new procedure is more complex. For the vacancy for an expired term, you have an alternative process and no alternative process. For the vacancy for the unexpired term, there is also no alternative process and the alternative process. We will be finalizing all guidance documents and anticipate to have them up on the website before the training, which takes place on October 10th and 12th. And we've also provided a few links for you to learn more about these resources. Thank you. That is the end of my presentation.
Do we have any questions? Yes. Senator Elkins.
I'm sorry. I have a question. So, if I understand the process correctly, you would submit 2 names to the county judge executive. He would next choose one of those names to submit to the fiscal court for approval or denial by the fiscal court. What would be the reasons for submitting 2 names and then withdrawing those 2 names and submitting 2 alternate names? Can you think of a reason that would happen?
Good morning. An instance where that could happen is if there was an error. The processes Ms. Lyons went through, there are several different processes for a library to follow, the Board of Trustees and the county judge executive. And so the submission would have to fall under, would have to follow the statutory process. So that could be a reason why that example that you gave might occur.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman. Yes, sir. So I guess what I'm hearing is the KDLA would, I don't really understand how there could be a contradiction, I guess, to statute to the first 2 names submitted and then withdrawn. Can you further explain that, please?
Yes, sir. So, for example, as Ms. Lyons gave the overview of, there are several processes. So one process would be if the library has not adopted an alternative process for an expired term. So if the term of the individual serving has expired, then the KDLA would follow one process that is set out in statute. If the expiration, it's an unexpired term. If the vacancy is being filled for an unexpired term, there would be a separate statutory process that would be followed. And so whichever process is followed should be the correct statutory process because KDLA wants to follow the law. And the statute is specific on how those are filled. Does that answer the question?
It does. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you, ladies.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Next, we have the discussion of property valuation process and HB 44. If we could have you gentlemen come up and introduce yourself for the records while we load up your PowerPoint presentation.
You can't see.
How's that? Okay, thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Tom Crawford, and I'm the Executive Director of the Office of Property Valuation.
I'm David O'Neill, Fayette County PVA and President of the PVA Association.
My name is Jared Taylor. I'm an employee with the Department for Local Government.
And we've been invited to discuss how the property tax values are arrived at by PVAs through the valuation process, and then to provide you with a discussion of House Bill 44, how the local taxing districts set their local property tax rates based on those assessments. So first I'm going to turn it over to Mr. O'Neill.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The PVA's office has a number of responsibilities, including administering various property tax exemptions like agriculture. The most rewarding one for me personally is the homestead exemption, but also charity, government, education, and we have some responsibilities in terms of valuation of motor vehicles. But the bulk of what we do is to arrive at the market value for property tax purposes for all real property in the county. And the way we go about this is through the use of our quadrennial reassessment plan, which is presented to the Department of Revenue and approved by them. So in essence, we physically inspect and reassess every property in the county once every 4 years. And in fact, we're the only county agency that I'm aware of, local, state, or federal level, that has a mandate to physically set foot on every property in the county. And so that's an important piece of what we do in placing value. So in addition to the physical inspections, the other big chunk of that is statistical analysis, where we do market studies, we analyze all of the sales in the county, we build models, valuation modeling is used pretty extensively, and we also use ratios where we compare a sale price to the value that we had the property assessed for at the time it sold, and we like for those ratios to be close to 100. We're required to have a average countywide ratio of 90% or better, but we use those at the micro countywide level as well as the local level. So in placing value, we use industry standard methodologies, and we follow the coursework and offerings of our professional association, which is the International Association of Assessing Officers. You may have heard of IAAO. And the State Department of Revenue also has an education program where they offer IAAO coursework, as well as some Kentucky-related courses to more specifically apply local laws and regulations to the process. We follow three primary approaches to value, which is the same approaches to value that appraisers use in any other valuation agencies across the country. And that number one is the cost approach. And that is, if you want to know what the value of a property is based on what it would cost to reproduce it, to buy the land, to build the improvement, the profit incentive of the developer, et cetera. And we typically only use the cost approach method for new construction. It loses its efficacy as the property ages because of depreciation and that type of thing. So income approach is the next one. That's almost exclusively for commercial property. What will an investor be willing to pay for a piece of property based on what the revenue stream of that property would generate, and then some type of an expected rate of return? And we use this for nearly all commercial property, which includes the multifamily apartment complexes. So what will the rents generate? What type of an expense would you expect associated with that revenue stream? And then some type of market rate of return, and that helps us arrive at a value for commercial property. Residential property is almost exclusively the comparable sales approach, and that's what most of you are probably going to be familiar with. Anybody who has seen an actual appraisal of a piece of property, and you look in there and you will find 3, 4, or 5 comparable sales where the sale price is then adjusted for differences in square footages and difference in the number of bathrooms and location, that type of thing. And that's how we arrive at value for most property in residential properties, which is what I'll focus on here. So this is Fayette County zoomed into the urban area, and I've got the county divided up into about 300 individual PVA neighborhoods or study areas. If you go to the next slide, we'll drill down into one neighborhood in particular. If you're familiar with Fayette County, this is Meadowthorpe, just inside New Circle Road off Leestown Road, and this is one of the 300 counties. So we reassess a fourth of the county every year, so about a fourth of those 300 neighborhoods, or about 75. It works out in Fayette County to be about 25,000 to 30,000 homes a year are reassessed. And we do it on a neighborhood by neighborhood basis. And again, what you see here is Meadowthorpe, and this is a sales map. And what I'm demonstrating here, those are the 36 most recent comparable sales within Meadowthorpe that may be used to place value in that particular neighborhood. And this particular map that you see here, I mailed to every property owner in Meadowthorpe who was reassessed. That's part of the reassessment notice that they get in the mail, and we'll come back to that briefly here in a minute. What you see on this map, though, is the address of the home, what it sold for, and what I had it assessed for at the time it sold. This is a piece of our software system. PVA offices have a software system referred to as CAMA. It's an acronym for Computer Aided Mass Assessing, and that's what we do. We do mass assessing. We don't do full-blown appraisals. We don't go inside homes. We do basically those physical inspections I referenced a minute ago, our windshield inspections. And then this is the comp page. This is similar to what you would see in appraisal, where you see the comps adjusted for each individual property. The one on the far left is the subject property. Then the 5 to the right of that, each column, are the 5 comparable sales that our computer has selected as the most comparable properties to the subject property. And then what you see down below are adjustments made for differences like square footage and number of bathrooms, and then the adjusted sale prices and the market value of the subject property. This is the reassessment notice we use in Fayette County, and this, by the way, has been recognized and commended by IAAO as a superior assessment notice because we provide the comparable sales right on the assessment notice. So it's been my belief, as long as I've been PVAs, that the reassessment process should be iterative, and it should be, and the taxpayer, the property owner, should be participatory in the process. So when they get the assessment notice in the mail from me, that's my best estimate at value. But again, this is mass assessing, windshield inspections. When we're out and standing in front of a house and looking at it, that's our one opportunity to provide a little bit of subjectivity to it. We're looking at that house compared to the other houses in the neighborhood and trying to make a determination of where it is relative to the others in terms of condition, deferred maintenance, desirability, utility, that type of thing. And with the assumption that the outside of the house is a pretty good indicator of what the inside of the house is. And if that's not the case, then we really do encourage with the assessment notice for the taxpayer to be involved in the process, to call us during that protest period. So it's a year-long process to place value. Where we are right now, as you all probably know, the tax roll has been certified, the rates have been set, and tax bills have been printed and are on their way to mailboxes in most counties right now. So where we are in that process in the PVA's office, we have now turned our attention to the 2024 tax roll, and we are out in the field doing those physical inspections, and we'll continue doing that through about the end of the year. After the first of the year, January, February, March, we're actually doing the quality control. We're uploading the data we collected in the field. We're placing values, and we're getting the tax roll ready to go to the printer to print these assessment notices. So the assessment notice, we're giving them the 5 actual comps that we use, but also the sales map on the back, which is another 36. So basically, we're providing 41 comps to every taxpayer with their assessment notice, and the language on the assessment notice is basically, please participate in this process. If we didn't get it right, let us know. So out of the 25,000, 30,000 assessment notices we'll send out every year, we'll hear from 5,000 taxpayers and walk them through that process, explain it a little better, and a few hundred of those will result in actual appeals being filed at the local board of tax appeals, which happens mid to late June, and then they can go from there to the state board of tax appeals. But these assessment notices obviously have answered a lot of questions up front. It used to be you just get a postcard in the mail. Here's your new value. Here's our phone number. But this answers a lot more questions, and we have found this to be very useful as far as that goes. So what we've seen, what you see here are median sale prices in Fayette County over the last 10 years, 2012 up to current. In 2012, the median sale price, half the people buying a house in Fayette County could do so for $150,000 in 2012. 10 years later, fast forward, it has doubled. Median sale price is now over $300,000 and was $280,000 at the conclusion of 2022, 100%. So in this period of time, you would have been reassessed potentially 3 times, and in 3 reassessments, your valuation would have doubled. 2012 was a good year to start with. That was the first year we really saw recovery coming out of the recession. So that's where it began to start going up. But notice in the first 6 or 7 years or so, those increases were pretty modest. So a quadrennial reassessment plan worked out pretty good over a period of 4 years. You'd see some increases, nothing too crazy. Look at the last 4 or 5 years though, where we're seeing 10, 12% increases in median sale price a year, that means if we're only reassessing you once every 4 years, you could be seeing a 40 or 50% increase in your property assessment just since the last time you were reassessed. So here, shrink that down a little bit to just 2019. That's kind of what it looked like going into the pandemic. Median sale price a little over 200,000. At the beginning of 2023, it was 280,000. So a 40% increase in median sale price. And I'm using median sale price here because it is a good indicator of what's happening with property values. From our standpoint, it lags by a year or so, but it's a pretty good snapshot of what the trend is on property values. So I know that some of you have probably heard from constituents. Obviously, we do too. That's our job to hear from constituents when they get the assessment notices. But I know that some of those calls are now trickling through to other members of government who want to know why in the world are we seeing these sky high reassessments, and this is the answer. This is what we're seeing in the housing market. So with that, I'll turn it over.
Okay. Thank you, David. Once a PVA finishes their reassessment work, they then report those assessment totals to our department, the Office of Property Valuation, where we compile them and add also, which is filed in the PVA office, the tangible property tax returns. We add those tangible assessment totals to this document here in front of you. It's our certification that goes to the local officials every year. It gives an indication of all the assessments, and then we multiply it by the state rates to get an idea of what kind of state revenues are being generated by each property class. And we use that to make sure that the tax bills are printed accurately as well. We compare that certification with the actual receipt that is received by the sheriff, so that tax bills, we are assured that tax bills are representing those assessments. On the next slide, this is what goes to the Department for Local Government. And this builds on the PVA assessments that you just saw. We have their PVA assessed real estate, PVA assessed tangible property, but then we also add centrally assessed property. That's your public service companies. There's also a line for distilled spirits and their new property, homestead exemptions. All of that information then goes to the Department for Local Government, where they begin the local property tax rate calculation. And we'll talk about, or Jared will talk about that in just a minute, but I wanted to show you on the next slide the assessment increases on a statewide basis that Mr. O'Neill just alluded to. In Fayette County, it's going crazy in Fayette County. Well, it's going very well, or very crazy, I guess, in the state as well. You can see that for the last 3 years, we were up 5.6% in 2021, but that does cause the state rate to go down a little bit from 12.2 to 11.9 cents per hundred. That's in accordance with the state provisions of House Bill 44. We are allowed at the state level up to a 4% increase in revenues on real property every year. So once assessments exceed 4%, then the state real property tax rate is supposed to come down to compensate for that assessment increase. So for the last 3 years, it has gone down from 12.2 to 11.4 cents per hundred at the state level to accommodate or compensate for those statewide real property assessment totals that you see. So after that, I will talk about the local property tax rate setting process, and I'll let Jared Taylor from DLG take over from here.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you all for having us here today to explain this. It's a little complicated, I know. It is kind of hard to wrap your head around. I've been doing this. I've been working for the department for 6 years. Been doing this for about the last 3 or so, and last year or so, I've really been able to understand what I'm doing with it. The gentleman who ran this program before me retired at the beginning of last year, and it's been our thing since. DLG is required to, can you hear me okay? DLG is required to produce a compensating rate and a 4% revenue rate based on the assessments that we get from Department of Revenue. That compensating rate is supposed to be exclusive of new property, homestead exemptions, things of that nature, and it's required to be the equivalent amount of revenue that was received in the prior year. So there's a bit of a misconception that the compensating rate is just a tax hike. It is not. It compensates the county and keeps them at a level revenue stream. We'll talk a little bit more about that. It runs, like I say, the compensating rate keeps the county level year to year. So if the county is generating, let's say, $1 million, and that might be optimistic for some counties, it might be low for others. If they're generating $1 million in revenue from year to year, it's going to be $1 million every year. That compensating rate is going to drive in $1 million worth of revenue into the county budget. The county is allowed to also take a higher rate. They're not required to take just that compensating rate. They can take a rate that's lower than the compensating rate. We just calculate what that compensating rate is and what that 4% rate is. I'm not sure exactly why we do a 4% rate. I think it's kind of arbitrary. I think it's just mostly a benchmark for the county to see this is what the compensating rate is and this is what the 4% would look like. You could have made that 5%, 8%, 10%, whatever the case might be. But the county is required to adopt a rate. It can be anything that they choose. We just provide them the compensating rate and 4%. The compensating and 4% do not apply to tangible personal property or motor vehicle. This is only applied to real property. It can be adopted in a single meeting of the court. It's almost designed to make it easy for counties to adopt the compensating rate. This allows for them to have a predictable level of income. If the county wants to choose anything higher than the compensating rate, let's say, for example, the compensating rate was 12 cents per hundred, and the 4% rate for a single county was 12.5 cents per hundred. The county could adopt a rate that was higher than the compensating rate, higher than the 12 cents we're talking about. They could do a 12.1, 12.2, 12.3. When they do, KRS 68245 requires them to have a hearing. That hearing requires advertisement in 2 consecutive weeks. They have to listen to their constituents and their concerns regarding a tax hike. This amounts to a tax hike for that county. If there is if they decide to raise it above the 4% rate, it is subject to recall. Any rate higher than the 4% is subject to recall. We don't, in Kentucky, have a lot of those. California, Idaho, Oregon, they have a recall every other week. But this is one of those situations where we have that ability here. And that process is outlined in KRS 132.17. I can get into that more if you want me to, but for the sake of brevity here, I think I'll just move past it. The county has 45 days to adopt a rate, and that's simply so that we can get those rates onto the sheriff's bill, I think, is where that derives from. They've got 45 days from the date of the certification of Mr. Crawford, who signs that initial certification bill. The county has, if they don't get that done within that time frame, they take the compensating rate by default. Again, it's almost as if this was designed to shoot for that compensating rate, which is, it's a good thing. It's kind of a brilliant design because it allows counties to have the same revenue, predictable revenue, year after year after year. When it comes to personal and motor vehicle, we do not set that. Counties set those rates on their own for personal, and that's from year to year. There is no compensating rate that goes along with that. We don't even give them a prediction of what something like that might be. There is a maximum rate allowed. It is dependent upon what they choose for their compensating rate. We have a worksheet that's available to them. We send that out to every county with the packet of information once we calculate these. It's also available on our website, and they can just punch in a few numbers, and it calculates what their maximum is. Motor vehicle rates are a little odd. Just to give you all some insight here, they were limited to what the maximum that could have been taken by a county or an entity was in 1983. So counties will provide their rates that they adopted to us from year to year when we go to start calculating these things and creating a benchmark. We have what those rates were, but we don't know what could have been. So if a county could have taken 16 cents per hundred for a vehicle in 1983, but only elected to take 14 cents, we don't know what that gap is. We'll only have the record for the 14 cents. But that's everything we have, or I have, and I think we're willing, we're glad to take any questions that you might have.
I've got a couple, but I think Senator Thayer has a question or two.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. David, I can't see you, but I know you're there. David and I have known each other since 1988, I think, before we both got into politics.
Yeah, we were both in college.
Yes, we were. Yes, we were. Horse racing brings a lot of people together, Mr. Chairman. David, you alluded to this spike in property values that you're seeing in Fayette County, and we're seeing it in Scott County as well. And I've had a lot of complaints from property owners about getting 30-40% increase on their assessment. Luckily, our fiscal court took the positive step of actually cutting property taxes. I don't think local governments need 30 or 40% more revenue. I see CAECO representatives out here are probably going to have a meltdown at that statement, but I think they need to learn to live within their means like the rest of us are doing during this inflationary economy. So while they took a cut in the tax rate, a lot of the other taxing entities in my county did not. Our school board actually raised taxes. And I'm getting a lot of complaints from property owners who want us to take another look at House Bill 44 to see if there are further protections that can be built in to ensure that when market factors drive the value of their homes up, I mean, that's an on paper value. It's not like people have that cash in the bank or are going to sell their house and see their liquidity go up. So they feel like it's unfair and that they're going to be hit with higher taxes. And I'm just wondering, as we're looking at legislation heading into the next session, if you all have any recommendations on further taxpayer protections that we could build in to give them some assurances that they're not going to see these huge tax increases when their property goes up. Again, it's not like the value in their savings account or their checking account's going up. It's paper value. So I appreciate your input on that, David, and the other gentleman as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, thank you, Senator. And those are good points, and those are the conversations, and sometimes the very difficult conversations we have on a daily basis. Nobody, believe me, no PVA wants to deliver an assessment notice with a 30, 40, 50% increase. Unfortunately, right now the way our statute and the Constitution reads, it's 100% fair cash value. One of the recommendations we hear probably the most as a result of these conversations and from taxpayer is surely there's a limit as to how much you can increase me in any given year. And the fact is that there's not. It's the Constitution says 100% fair cash value. And so, a change like that, is it possible to implement some type of a cap? But, one of the primary concerns and tasks that we have as a PVA is to administer the tax laws fairly and equitably towards every taxpayer. So how do you implement that where the people who were reassessed last year were reassessed it to 100% fair cash value, and next year perhaps we cap that somewhere? So as an association, we don't have a recommendation. I personally don't have a recommendation, but like I demonstrated in the first slide of median sale prices, usually the procedure works out pretty well. We find ourselves in a housing market situation right now that's it's not unique to Kentucky, not unique to Lexington. There is a shortage of housing product, and supply and demand dictates that means prices go up, and hopefully that will be short-lived. But right now we've been through a full cycle of it.
Can I follow up on David's comment? Yeah, I figured you'd say something like that because that's what my PVA said as well. And I understand the limits you all have from the Constitution and the statute. And I'm not suggesting this is your all's fault. I mean, you're following the law, and I get that. And I'm a big believer in the market economy, and the home prices are being driven up because of supply and demand. And eventually it will likely take care of itself. Free markets generally do that. But in the meantime, people's taxes are going up, and they feel it's unfair because it's not like that cash is in the bank for them. They're being hit with higher grocery costs, higher gas costs, lots of other inflationary pressures, and they feel like this is a paper value that they're being asked to pay a higher tax on. So I would suggest, here we are on September 26th, David, I think it would be advisable that the PVA Association come up with a recommendation to bring to the legislature. Otherwise, we may come up with one on our own, and you may like the suggestion you come up with better than the one that we come up with. So just some friendly advice, old friend.
Understood, Senator, and we'll take it back to the association.
Representative Meredith has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And following up on Senator Thayer, seems to be a theme for the day. But David, first, I've got a question. And it's really more of a curiosity question that deals directly with the presentation. But when you talked about the median home price over that decade that you had in that slide, have you looked back at previous decades to see what that increase is over previous decades prior to the one that we find ourselves currently in?
No, I have not spent as much time looking at those in decades prior to, say, 2009. I came into office in early 2009, which was basically day one of the recession. So 2004, 2005 in Fayette County were kind of the heydays in the real estate market. More homes were sold in 2004, 2005 than ever before or ever since, actually. And it's also worth noting that that the number of new homes that we would bring online in Fayette County when we would add inventory to the real estate market would look like the trend. You know, if you would see 6,000 homes were sold, a certain percentage of those would be new construction, and the new construction trends looked like the trends of the real estate market overall. But since the recession, they no longer look like that. We build about 500 houses a year in Fayette County, regardless of what's happening in the market. That's been our limit, and so that's been a significant impediment to the supply. But to answer your question, I have not spent much time analyzing prior decades. And I think Andrew, by the way, I'm sorry, Andrew Powell is my immediate predecessor as PVA Associate President, and he's the PVA in Henderson County.
The reason I asked that question is to say this, because I was curious, really. I had an old farmer in Smiths Grove, Sheriff Hightower, one time that told me that land is always going to be the best investment you can ever make because every 10 years it's going to double in value. And that's raw land he's talking about, and there's probably some level of truth in that. I would wonder how it would apply across the board and with housing stock and all those kinds of things involved too, with that anecdotal phrase that the old farmer gave me, and just wondering that. And to further move along on what Senator Thayer was saying, I think the key was House Bill 44 was meant to try to keep those major increases in a tax bill from happening. I think the difficulty is when you're on a quadrennial assessment cycle, which I think is necessary in most counties to be able to assess the property properly, because can you assess all of it in 1 year? Can you assess all of it in 2 years? It gets very difficult otherwise, because some folks are going to be hitting the first year of that cycle when the cycle really increases, but it's going to level out over that period of 4 years. Because again, the downward pressure on those rates because of what happens with House Bill 44. But I think, we've done some things about technology and assessing by technology instead of assessing by direct viewing of the property, direct assessment of the property. Maybe that's something we need to take into a further place so that maybe we can speed that cycle up somehow or another. And I don't know if that would work just with the schedules and the calendars and everything else like that, but maybe that technology is something we need to expand on to some degree.
Yes, sir.
May I comment on your initial question, Representative Meredith? I'm Andrew Powell. I'm the Henderson County PVA. I was asked to be here as a medium to small size county perspective and PVA approach. I have looked at previous generations almost exclusively. The prime market rates is what dictates housing price changes. When we switched from the 80s to the 90s, we saw a big jump because we finally came off the early 80s, 17 to 20% rates. The problem now, and as Senator Thayer referred to it as an inflationary economy, we're now in a situation where rates are rising, but so are home prices, and that's the inverse of what we've seen before when we're looking at this. So, like safety nets, like House Bill 44, like as you described it, Representative Meredith, maybe it is time to to bolster that or make that stronger in situations like this, where a free market economy, we're seeing an anomaly. And as Senator Thayer pointed out, it will correct itself eventually, but what do we do for the pain that's happening right now? Because you can't refinance your HELOC to have that extra cash available because the rates are so high. It doesn't make any sense. So we are I think I'm proud of our legislature recognizing this issue, because this is something that's hitting the pocketbooks of our taxpayers and our citizens. We've got a constitutional mandate. We've talked about that, but maybe there are situations we can all come to the table and provide a stronger safety net to make sure that we're not hitting our taxpayers too hard until we do get that equalization.
Can I follow up just real quickly on Andrew's point? And it's a good one, because it's part and parcel of these conversations that we're having from property owners. Interest rates are high. That means my value has to be going down, right? And in fact, that's not the case, because homeowners are reluctant to sell their house right now. They want to keep that low interest rate locked in. So it's having just the opposite effect. Interest rates are going up. We're keeping people in their houses longer. That's causing the supply to maintain its low levels, and it's causing prices to go up.
And a comment I'd like to add, and I didn't explain it very well, is that with the compensating rate, when home values go up, the compensating rate typically goes down. So as you have more assets available to you, that rate drops down to keep that minimum threshold of revenue coming in. If home prices drop, then that rate then goes up.
Senator Williams has a question.
Thank you. I have two, hopefully short questions and a comment. One, is the compensating rate, the formula that you use to determine it, is that publicly available, that it can be reviewed by any citizen of the Commonwealth?
It's in statute, Senator.
It's in statute.
It is in statute.
But the actual calculations you do with the numbers, they just have to derive it from statute, right?
They are.
Okay. Two, when you go out and visit the homes, put eyes on them, do you use drones, or do you make use of the overflight to look at properties to see what has changed in those 5 years?
Senator, I don't think my constituents would take too kindly to me flying their property with a drone. So that's some technology I've been very reluctant.
You bring a drone to Henderson County, it's going to get shot down.
Do you know if anybody in the state does?
There's been some experiment. I mean, the FAA is getting stronger in regulating drones and heights and such like that. We do, as our budgets allow, we do purchase aerial imagery flyovers as often as possible, especially, of course, I only get 30 new houses a year, but I'm having a stream. We're having a significant boom in our downtown industry moving into Henderson County. So we do use aerial imagery, maybe not direct drone close range imagery, but we do purchase. Every county, I believe, now has aerial imagery. Now, how often it's updated is dictated by their budget.
Thank you. And then the comment on the 4% for House Bill 44, I think that was instituted back when inflation was about 4% or less. And then we've gone through a period, and what we're really talking about here is the value of money. And it seems to me that in a period that we've been through a decade or so of very low inflation, 4% actually permitted a de facto tax hike. But now we're in a point where we've got higher than 4% inflation. And so the 4% may, in fact, not allow the local government's purchasing power to keep up with inflation over the current years. And so I'm thinking one of the things we may want to do is take a look at that 4% number and determine how was that arbitrarily derived? How did it get here in House Bill 44? Do you have any comment on that?
I absolutely do. I think there should be a comparison to, like you say, the time value or the value of currency at its current stage, and that's inflation. I don't believe inflation is necessarily a key cog to that formula, but I think it's absolutely true that if you've got a 7% inflation and you can only take 4%, we've got a taxpayer that's paying 40% more plus 4%, but their money is worth less to begin with because of inflation. I think adding that into the equation is definitely something that should be looked at.
Thank you.
Senator Harper Angel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a point of personal privilege, Mr. Chairman, I'm having a huge amount of deja vu over here. and I'm almost looking for that other hat that I used to wear, but having spent 30 years in that office, I was actually a deputy when House Bill 44 was signed, when Lieutenant Governor signed it, when the governor was out of state. And everybody was very excited about it, and it was $6,500. Now it's $46,350, but the every 2 year CPI increase is not keeping up with inflation. And I think that's the thing we have to tackle more so than trying to make a constitutional amendment over the 100% fair market value. I think that's going to be a harder thing to do. My PVA, Colleen Younger, has recently sent out, and I believe it went to everybody, or it might have just gone to Jefferson County, a document that she referred to as circuit breaker solutions. And there were a lot of really good recommendations in it, particularly focusing on House Bill 44. A lot of good graphs, and I would suggest, David, that you have her resend that to all the General Assembly. And again, I think it'd be easier to go in some reform of 44 than trying to do a constitutional amendment at this point. I really appreciate that Senator Thayer asked for the recommendation, because we're always looking for that. We need that in order to move forward. So that's my little deja vu down the road. And I do have to say that, Tom Crawford, I miss your red hair.
I do too.
And I have a stylist that can help you out with that. Thank you all for what you do. It's a hard job.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Bledsoe.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you all for your presentation. And just a note of also personal privilege. Mr. Emil does a phenomenal job in Fayette County. I think you do such a great job in communicating to your constituents with information, answering conversations, and those questions that they get. Why does this go up? Why is it not? Help me understand. And I think you've done a great job modernizing the office and providing great customer service.
Thank you, Senator, and back at you.
So that being said, this conversation about the 4% in local governments, I know in Fayette County they have reduced those rates so as not to have the voter recall on the assessment. And I'm just curious, if you've got a sense statewide, how many local communities are looking at their 4% and trying to stay above or below so they don't have that recall?
I don't have a feel for that.
I don't have that information. We could probably take a look and see. They don't report those directly to us. We usually get those in the spring, what the county adopts in terms of a rate. We get those in the spring when we review the county budgets. So I won't have that information right now. A few counties have submitted information to us. We keep that, we log it, but we don't have an idea of what that's going to be.
Yeah, all I have is anecdotal. There's been one school system that proposed a greater than 4%. One time since I've been in office, it was recalled, but it failed at the vote, so that it did go through. But that's the only time it's been attempted. It was recalled, but it did ultimately pass or fail, depending on how you look at it. The increase did go through.
I think that would be just a useful data point for us to see kind of how everyone's looking at it locally, and then also what that means maybe for some recommendations moving forward, how local governments are approaching it. And then two, in Fayette County we talk a lot about not just affordable housing, but housing affordability. Because housing affordability is for everyone who's looking for a home and wants to invest. And when you have that shrinkage, the people that are kind of impacted the most are seniors who can't afford to leave their home, meaning they've either paid for it or they have a homestead exemption, or in that market where they might be wanting to downsize, but they're selling a house that's $300,000 and the senior living is $600,000. It doesn't make any sense for them to do that. And then the young family who needs to move from the starter home into the next phase of home has no inventory. So it's just as stagnant, and there's no market shift, and that's a housing affordability for everyone problem. And if you come up with a solution for that, that would be great.
Well, and we're no longer building starter homes. So,
Right.
and if you look back over the last 5 or 6 years in Fayette County, I think we have built maybe 10 houses that sold for less than new houses that sold for less than $200,000. When you take out, and most of those are Habitat for Humanity. So
That's right.
So when you look at just arm's length transactions, properties that were available to anybody in the market, it's maybe 1 or 2 a year for under $200,000.
That's correct. And even Habitat has been moving to townhomes.
Right.
To do more affordability and more density in that space. And when you have land continuing to grow at the price it is, it impacts the cost of, most of those homes that are going in, certainly on the south side, $500,000 to $700,000. They're not starter homes.
Right.
So it's a real challenge. And I think as we want to provide more affordability and accessibility for families to build wealth and build generational wealth, that is a huge barrier. And this plays a part in that conversation. So I appreciate what you all do and look forward to some maybe potential recommendations.
Yeah, thank you. And so this year, our school board did not go above the 4%, but they did last year. So to your point, and to Senator Thayer's point about do the local districts need, 20% increase? Well, since we only do a fourth of the county a year, the tax roll, the overall tax roll in Fayette County last year grew 8%. So that's what the school board, got closer to 8% rather than stick to their 4. So since we only reassess 25% a year, last year 75% of the property owners in Fayette County would have gotten a tax cut if the compensating tax rate had been allowed to go into effect. But the school board decided to increase that, so it ended up being a net increase for 100% of the property owners.
Gentlemen, we're going to start round 2. Representative Meredith has another question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence on that, and I'll try to be brief. It's really more of a comment, and I could literally sit here as a banker and a legislator who has been engaged in local government issues for a long, long time. I could sit here and talk about housing inventory and property taxes and those kinds of things all day long. But I think it's really important, Andrew, what you brought up a few minutes ago into this conversation about the 4% and who's taking the 4% or the over the 4%. We've really focused this conversation on city and county governments, but the real big piece, if you look across the state at property taxes, the big piece is the school systems. If you look, I think on average in unincorporated areas, the school board rate makes up somewhere between 80 and 85% of the tax bill. And in an incorporated area, I think it's somewhere between 55 and 65%. That number has fluctuated over the years, and I don't know the exact number today. But over 50, generally anywhere you're at in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, over 50% of your property tax bill, when you look at it, is the school board rate, not the city or the county rate. And I think many times the taxpayer, and even those of us in Frankfort who may not be as engaged in these processes, think about the city and county because that's who the bill comes from. It doesn't come from the school board. But I think it's awfully important that as we have this discussion, we interject the piece of when you look at property taxes, it has really become the lifeblood of the Board of Education's, and it's a supplemental piece at best for city and county governments.
And second at bat is Senator Thayer.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. This has been a great discussion, and it's proof to some of our newer members. You never know where a committee meeting is going to go. Oftentimes, they don't go anywhere. But this one, I think, has, first of all, I love the talk about supply and demand and market economics. It's been great, and having so many members engaged in that discussion today has been really helpful, I think. Back to what Senator Harper Angel said, great history lesson. And I want to expand on what she said. It was in the late 70s when House Bill 44 was passed, when then Governor Julian Carroll was out of town, the lieutenant governor became acting governor, Martha Stovall, correct? Thelma Stovall, and called a special session and passed House Bill 44. I mean, really an amazing maneuver by the lieutenant governor at the time. And back then, of course, we elected lieutenant governors separately from the governor, so there may not have been as much loyalty. So maybe it's time that we look at reforms to House Bill 44. I agree with Senator Harper Angel. A constitutional amendment on this topic, I think, is a bridge too far. I think we're going to be very discerning about constitutional amendments moving forward. And, I think it's going to be other issues that are going to be tackled when it comes to constitutional amendments. Talk about that another time, another place. But I do think this discussion has shown that there are a lot of good minds on the topic. And I'm going to go back to what I said, David. If you guys could come with a recommendation, and I would say keep the chairman of local government in the loop, and also I'm going to look at my colleague across the room there, Representative Meredith. This is right in his wheelhouse. And in the chamber that I serve in, I think Senator Harper Angel and Senator Mays Bledsoe, of course, some of the newer members may not realize that Senator Harper Angel was the Jefferson County PVA before she got elected to the state Senate. And Senator Mays Bledsoe has a lot of experience from city council in Lexington and dealing with all the land use issues that are unique to Fayette County. I'd like to just throw that out there, if I may, Mr. Chairman, as sort of maybe an informal working group that you might want to get back to with some of these recommendations. I know Keiko would probably be interested in being a part of the discussion, and maybe the folks at the School Boards Association, back to Representative Meredith's point. So that would be my action item, is that we look at some taxpayer protection potential adjustments to House Bill 44 with that group of people. And anyone else who may be interested, you should alert the chairman. Thank you, sir.
Point taken, Senator. Thank you.
I've got a couple of quick follow-ups. Andrew, you and I go way back for a while, and Tom as well, for the PVA task force. Just a couple of quick things. On the evaluation methods, are we having as big a problem with some of the commercial evaluations now as we were a few years ago? Because we had testimony that there were the 3 evaluation methods. The income approach was included in that. I know we've had some commercial entities that have bucked that, wanting it to what we used to call the dark store theory. They want to take an empty building and have their active building bringing in hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in rent be valued at what an empty building in a low traffic area is bringing. And have we had many complaints, or do we have many on the records now as what it has in the past?
Well, that's kind of an ongoing thing that we monitor. And for example, just about I've been PVA for 14 years, and almost every year I've been PVA. Walgreens and CVS have appealed us and taken us all the way to the Supreme Court in one year, where we held many years worth of appeals in abeyance to let that work its way through the courts. More recently, it's been Home Depot and Lowe's, but yeah, the dark store theory is something that we monitor very closely.
Okay. If you don't mind, keep me up to date on that. We're still working on that.
Yes, sir.
The other thing is the physical inspections versus what I believe Representative Meredith brought up, the technology. We've got Google Earth, we've got flyovers. We spent, I think, $9 million the session before last on state mapping to help enhance that. It's not there yet, but they're still working on that to make sure that every PVA has aerial photography. And I was talking to Mr. Crawford earlier about maybe something being put in. With all the technology we got going on, I can't imagine it's not possible. A lot of PVAs I've talked to, they go by numbers and not units. And when I say that, if they've got, and I'm just throwing a number out, if they got 10,000 houses out there, and they got them, or 10,000 properties, and they've got to constitutionally mandate they have to inspect that many, revisit those properties. Instead of using actual locations and units, they're doing it by numbers. So 10,000 divided by 4 years, 2,500 a year. As long as they get 2,500 reevaluations, they feel like they've met that every 4-year match. And what that does, there's some houses that will sell in that 4 years, 2 or 3 times possibly, depending on the neighborhood, the transitions, workforce, and all that. And then there are others out there sitting there that may not have been looked at in 10 years. And is there a way we can put into our systems to where that there's a clicker or a counter that every time because a house is assessed 3 times in a 4-year period, that should not, in my opinion, count as 3 different assessments to go toward that 4-year number of what they've got to meet. And, so on that 5th year, any house that has not been reassessed, has been overlooked, whatever, it automatically comes up and makes it possibly mandatory for that 5th year that house has got, that location's got to be addressed, reassessed, or whatever. Because what I'm getting a lot of is older couples in slow neighborhoods that have been forgotten because of generational turnover. Now all of a sudden there's a lot of generational turnover. They're being reassessed, and their assessment hasn't changed in several years, and it's quadrupling in some instances. And how can we prevent that? and it may not be supposed to happen, but it's happening. So just wonder if you could look into that.
Well, those are good points, and I'll speak to it a little bit because in my tenure as PVA, there's been a couple of times where this has been a bigger issue than others. Like, for example, I mentioned 2009, 2010, 2011 years when we were in the midst of the recession, and I was not doing much reassessing. We were lowering assessments quite a bit in 2010, a little bit in 2011, but there were many properties that came up organically on the quadrennial plan in 2009, 2010 that should have been reassessed but weren't because the market was such. We weren't doing reassessments. We didn't have the sales to base them on, and the overall economy didn't suggest that we should be doing reassessments. So then, we can't. Then the economy comes back in 2012, 2013. We don't have the resources to now do more than one quadrennial plan in any given year. So then it takes 3-4 years to fully catch up. And the same thing has happened during the pandemic. I didn't reassess anybody in 2020. About the time that we were sending the tax roll to the printer to print assessment notices is when state government shut down. So we didn't do any reassessing in 2020, did very little reassessing in 2021. So now in 2023, 2024, I'm playing catch up. And the way that I'm mostly playing catch up is to use that ratio that I told you about, looking at what sale prices look like compared to the assessments on a neighborhood by neighborhood basis and trying to hit the neighborhoods that really need to be gotten to. But the result is there are homes, like you suggested, Representative Bridges, where maybe it's been 6, 8, 10 years since the value has moved. Now, we've done the physical inspection. We've been there. We've looked at the property. We've taken the picture. But just because a house, the value didn't move doesn't mean it wasn't reassessed. It was reassessed and left at its previous value.
Yeah, also expanding on that, we in Henderson County, and our interpretation of our constitutional and statutory mandate is that David referred to them as neighborhoods. We call them maps, which is a folder of every property in a geographical area. We've got around 100 maps in Henderson County. We look at every property regardless of its transactional history once every 4 years. So it may sell 5 times in 4 years, but if it comes up in our quad, we're going to go there, take a new picture. But to David's account, I think what you're saying here, if we have, and I don't want to say stagnant, but if we have a consistent low turnover neighborhood, we stratify all of our assessments. And what that means is we try to condense down as like properties as possible to use as our comparable sales. So if we have a consistent neighborhood that are all 1,500 square feet, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and we don't have sales in that area, we may not change it in that 4-year period. So it may go 8 years without an assessment change, but we have been there because it showed up in that map folder, and we visit every property.
Thank you. We're going to move on now to the discussion of the sheriff's transportation cost. And while they come up to the desk, I want to tell the committee members that we do have administrative regulations that's been referred, and unless someone has a specific question, we'll go ahead and move past those and get them out of our way. No, we don't need a motion. Just bringing that. If anyone has anything to say about those, just bring them to us. We'll try to wrap this up real quick. I'm sorry that you got on the end of the schedule, but if you can just briefly catch us up on your transportation cost and the difficulties of that, please. And introduce yourself.
Chairman, I'm Sheriff Brett Hightower from Warren County. Would like to thank you and the other representatives here today for your time and attention in this matter. We just want to bring some information you all may or may not be most aware of. And so I believe I provided a document here, and this is just an overview from Warren County, not representative of the Commonwealth of Kentucky, but an overview of Warren County and our transports since this order has come into effect through the Secretary of Justice office. It is that we have transported 19 juveniles in the past year. And those 19 juveniles, 13 of those were females, and the other 6 were male. And so the cost of this, and I think you all may have this in front of you, or here it is coming up. I don't know how well you can see that. If you scroll up a little bit, it might be in your packet there. But this is just like an overview. And so the cost to us was $4,384.13. And although that may not seem like an enormous amount of money, that's unfunded. That's $5,000 that we have that we've gone out and done this on with these juveniles. And part of the issue of this is the reimbursement on these. And so for that reimbursement, what's legally reimbursed to us is the mileage, any food and or lodging provided to the juveniles. And then with a lot of these, I said 13 of these are for females. So Warren County, where these females have to go, it's a round trip of 435 miles to take these juveniles for us. And then with that, because of being female, KRS also states that we are required under KRS 605.080 that we must have an accompaniment of an attendant of the same gender of those that we are transporting. So the reimbursement on that attendant is $5 per hour. I don't know if anybody in here is working for $5 an hour anywhere, but so every time we launch, and you figure that's 4-hour drive there and then 4 hours back. So that's 8 hours, two employees with that 8 hours, 16 man hours, and then we get reimbursement on the mileage for that and any food or lodging that we would do. We're not doing lodging with them. We're taking them there. So that is quite a burden on us, and we don't have any foreseeable change in what's going on with this. I've had many conversations. I was told there's a plan coming in place. I have not seen any plan other than it seems like, here's the football, you all run with it, whatever you need. Yeah, we're here, but we're not seeing any real resolution with this. And, just on top of this, I had my office run some numbers. In 2019, our office ran 65 out-of-state transports and 414 in-state transports, and that was total of prisoner, juvenile, KCPC. In 2023, from August 22nd of last year to August 23rd of this year, or August 22 to August 23, we've run 1,324 transports. So we've tripled, going from 400 to over 1,324 transports across the Commonwealth of Kentucky that we're doing every single day. I don't know if some of this is just post-COVID, folks that were kind of in waiting, and now they're having to come to courts and back and forth all over. But 3 to 4 transports per day, and then we throw in these other ones. So we've had to hire additional manpower, personnel, just to help with the transportation of these individuals across the state of Kentucky. So at a time that we're seeing these huge increases, now once again we're being tasked with this other situation of transporting juveniles as well. And so with this, there's some concerns that I have. One is the hours these juveniles are in police custody, being driven across the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And so, hours at a time in the back of a police vehicle and being handcuffed, I think is not necessarily the look that we want as police dealing with juveniles. And so that's one of my concerns. My other concern is just the distance. I think it's a hardship on the families when they have family members that have been placed in a juvenile detention center, and how are they going to possibly drive for hours on end just to go up there and do a visitation with their family members, probably at a time that they may need more visitation and more family support than any other time. And so these are just a couple of my concerns, aside from just the liability of the numerous hours on the road with these juveniles in the back of our vehicle. But I'll also let my other members of this panel here introduce themselves and share their concerns if they have any.
I'm Mike Jansen. I'm the president of the Kentucky Sheriff's Association, representing all 120 sheriffs. First, I want to thank the chairman and the committee for this time opportunity you give us. And I'm going to turn it over to Chief Deputy Pat Morgan from the Kenton County Sheriff's Office that has more information.
Well, yes, I'm Pat Morgan. I'm the Chief Deputy of Kenton County Sheriff's Office. I've been in law enforcement 42 years now, and we've gone to a problem where, as I've spoke to my fellow colleagues, that we become the UPS of transports for the Commonwealth. We are driving more juveniles and taking more juveniles since this order has gone into effect. This is a continuation of where it started back in the late 80s, and now where we had local detention facilities, we went to regionals. Now regionals are closing, and now we're at this point where we're just transporting more and more juveniles, when as we look at technology, there is ways to get away from doing this. It's just the courts have to use the technology and the judges if they so choose. Some courts are doing it, some are not. We have spoke to it. We just recently had our conference in Bowling Green, or in Owensboro. This topic was brought up. As Sheriff Hightower, he comes to Northern Kentucky. Us in Northern Kentucky, we had a facility in Campbell County. I believe you're bringing your young ladies up to Northern Kentucky. Northern Kentucky, we've had a couple serious violent crimes where several juveniles have been involved in murders. So we are transporting them to and from and around the state quite often. I understand there's the technology ability. So when we look at this, and this has been an ongoing issue of technology that could be used, that possibly can be used to stop the transports, and the cost to the Commonwealth is astronomical. Back in a personal story, 1997, a family member who was in California who had a child that my wife and I had to go, and we went there to take custody, actually used technology in courts in 1997 where the family member was 200 miles away, and was using that in 1997 for not only a criminal proceeding but an adoption proceeding to take custody of now our daughter that we adopted. So when we look at all this, and we're going back to 1997, we're here at this point, we cannot even get, we need to get some ways to get relief for our sheriffs across the Commonwealth. Court orders that are issued every day, pickups of violent offenders who are committing crimes, or pickup orders for violating their probation or parole is one of the big, as other issues we're having, where we're spending several hours from our communities, where city law enforcement city officers are gone 4 to 6, 8 hours on a shift transporting one juvenile, another city, or they have to call in for overtime, or the sheriff takes over and does the covering the city at that time. So it has become a burden, the cost, not only financially, but to cover the cities and counties with less personnel is having an effect on all of our counties and cities.
Chairman, I believe we've expressed our concerns here, and we'd just love to take any questions you all may have.
Are there any questions? Yes, Representative Bowling.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And you mentioned several times better technology that you think could be a fix for this issue if it would be applied. What is that, and can you explain that in a little more detail?
Sure. Most of our court system, if not all, have the video arraignment systems within the courtrooms or in the justice centers. And I know the detention facilities, or the holding facility, detention facilities, they have done some of the upgrades that were funding was sent by the legislators to do upgrades in the facilities to do these, to have the arraignments, or maybe status hearings, status calls. Sometimes when we do a transport, if we're going to Bowling Green, or we're going to Breathitt, Ashland, Fayette, or they're coming north, if you show up with a juvenile or any prisoner, even adult, when we're moving these, there might be the attorney doesn't show up, some key person can't make it, so we're taking them back, coming back. These status kind of calls, things like that occur, and there is technology out there that can help with this. It's just if the courts so choose to use it or not.
Okay, thank you. And two quick follow-ups.
Sure.
They'll be real short. So, from my understanding, DJJ, they have taken on more of a role in transportation. They have testified to that recently. Have you all seen that in any areas in particular?
I have not.
Okay.
Maybe some, but it's still we're still doing the vast majority. When they go to court, if our agency, my office, arrests a juvenile at 7 o'clock tonight, and we're going to Breathitt County or Ashland tonight, that juvenile has to be back to court at 8:30 the next morning. And that's on us. That's 3 hours to Ashland, 4 hours to Breathitt. So that's what we're doing. That's city or county. And then if they're remanded back into custody, they're going back to the facility by the judge.
Is your all's preference to not do this, or that if you are going to do it, you need to be reimbursed, at least cover your costs?
I think our
And
preference
hopefully
is
greater.
going back to where it used to be, where we had facilities that were open and not closed, and they were open, and that this wasn't a problem until this order went into effect. If they didn't close, we had no problems in Campbell, Warren. This was not a problem created to us. It was as we got the football, and you go with it, and that's where we're at now.
Understood. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Representative Freeland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You'd mentioned the 1,320 transports. You think of a deputy on the road who could be in the community working to protect the community. That's several hours that you've got deputies on the road instead of serving in their community. But you mentioned the cost and the decision to use technology or not. Is that each individual court makes that determination, the judge? How is that decision made?
During COVID, a lot of times it seemed like some of the judges were more inclined to utilize the technology, where they would continue doing that for a while some of the other ones were really more opposed to that technology. And look, the last thing we ever want to do is not have somebody with legal representation there with them. And sometimes it may be a little more difficult to set those meetings up. But I think, like anything, if the judge wants it done, then it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Some areas are doing that effectively with the arraignments in areas of the Commonwealth.
Right. And it's just for like sentence hearings and things like that. It's not the actual trial or anything of that nature. So,
Right.
So yeah. Well, thank you.
Yes, Representative Stevenson.
Okay. Thank you for what you do for our youth. My question is, do we have any numbers, like if we were to use technology or open more facilities, how would that free up the sheriffs? Do we have done any analysis of the number, if that 1310 number would drop it?
Well, you talking about the 1324 that we have there? Right. Not all of those. The majority of those are adults being transported there. But we would be able to, we know without a fact that a lot of times we're just running to get somebody, bringing them back for some minor offense because they've got a more serious offense in another detention facility they're being housed at. So roughly, I can say probably 20 to 25% at least, we would probably be able to reduce the amount of time on those roads. And those equate to exact man hours that we have. Because, like I say, not only do we have the prisoner transports, but we in Warren County have mental health transports that have to go to Hopkinsville, and we average 2 of those a day, and then any juvenile transports on top of that. So we have several deputies who are out of Warren County on any given day for most, if not all, their shift.
Thank you.
With that, we are at the end of our time limit. We're going to bring this to a close. We have next meeting October the 24th. Members will be notified. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Thank you all.
Not today.
Well, they don't pull my hair
Yeah.
And he don't have red hair.
Yeah, we
Thank
have,
you.
we have the ones that we have several involved in counties that are just one. He said, it's not women's family, they don't get to see their family.
I know that.
You know, when we get them up to court, they want their family, you know, we can't have their family hugging and grabbing all over them. And the bad people, you know, within their family, if they're in our facilities where we had them, they can go visit them every Wednesday or Saturday and see their family, you know, the kids. At the time they need them most, you know.
I'm an attorney, and we usually base everything on the